Hello there, my name is Monica Burns, and welcome to Technology Essentials in Education. I'm so excited to chat with Dr. Jacie Maslyk today. We're going to get into all things STEAM together in this conversation. I recently saw Dr. Jacie Maslyk at an event we were both speaking at in San Francisco. It had probably been a few years since we bumped in together, so it was really nice to chat with her in person earlier this year. And I wanted to bring her onto the podcast so that you could hear her perspective on where STEAM education is headed right now. It's something that I know listeners are going to appreciate. Jacie is an educational consultant with a background in many different places within a school community, teaching in the classroom, working as a literacy and reading specialist, a principal at the elementary level, an assistant superintendent. So she's had a long, wonderful career that really brings a great lens to a big conversation like STEAM integration. She's also the author of STEAM Makers, which was recently updated to reflect some of the big shifts happening in STEAM right now, which is what we talk about together today. So everything from changes with tools to things we think about around design thinking. She talks about creating for social good and what that looks like in a larger STEAM conversation, and really focusing on some great connections to literacy and career readiness. So if you teach in a core content area, if you work in a more interdisciplinary role, if you're looking for ideas related to robotics or AI in the classroom, this is the conversation for you. So let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Dr. Jacie Maslyk. This episode is brought to you by Jotform. Jotform provides an all-in-one solution to streamline administrative tasks, enhance community engagement, and foster innovation. Using their no-code drag-and-drop forms and workflows, your teams can securely collect and store data, automate tasks, and collaborate on team resources. Educational institutions are also eligible for a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to chat with you today about STEAM tips for this year. But before we get into all of that, can you share with listeners a bit, what is your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Well, my current day-to-day is traveling across the country and
Mhm.
supporting schools and leaders in things like STEAM education. I also have a really strong background in literacy, so some of my work is also around literacy coaching and kind of amplifying the role of effective literacy instruction within a lot of struggling schools. And so I love it when both of those worlds get to kind of intermix. I'm very passionate about how literacy and STEAM learning kind of can be interwoven in really creative ways. And I think the role that I'm in now kind of speaks to my past. I mean, I was a classroom teacher, a reading specialist, a principal, and now I'm able to kind of pull the skills from all of those different roles into what I do right now.
Yeah, and I think that perspective is really important when we talk about, all the things that you could do under the STEAM umbrella, right? Which is kind of a big kind of topic to tackle together. And you and I saw each other not too long ago in San Francisco for a big conference where I know you were presenting right on topics related to what we're talking about today. And when you think about STEAM in 2026, what feels different than even 2 or 3 years ago?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that is what led me to my most recent publication.
Mhm.
Right. So I wrote my first book, my own first book ever, Steam Makers, back in 2015. And the publisher reached out and said, like, I think it's time that we do a little
Mhm.
upgrade, right? I mean, think of how much has changed with
Mhm.
technology, with access, with programs and curriculum. things like robotics even, that have changed over the years. And so much really has changed. But I think particularly in the last couple years, um, for me, the change that I see happening in STEAM education is away from, I'll call it the stuff, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when we
Yeah.
started STEM programs in my school, I was a principal in 2015. We started this work, we were establishing a space in our school, and a lot of the focus was on, well, like what's the stuff that you're buying, or
Yeah.
what are your kids working with?
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, do you have the coolest, hottest new thing? And
Right.
I think, thankfully, and I mean, I love a good STEM
Yeah.
tool,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
I do think that it has changed lately into the thinking that goes behind that kind of work, which I think is so much more powerful than just the acronym,
Yeah.
right? Like getting kids to think deeply about design and collaboration in meaningful ways is going to carry them much farther than, STEAM.
Yeah.
It's going to carry them into careers, and it's going to support them in language arts and history and, in the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the fact that we've gotten away from stuff and we've really
Mm-hmm.
laid a solid foundation for, you know, what is design thinking and what does it mean to come up with different iterations of ideas and prototypes. Those things I think are just so much more beneficial in the long run for young people as they head into, like, high school or college and career choices.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been a big shift, at least in some of the work that I've seen.
Yeah, and I would imagine, right, that as those conversations are changing around, like, what do you have, or what have you seen, or have you tried this new thing, right, this stuff, like you mentioned, right, that foundation being so much stronger, I would imagine leads to conversations that feel a bit more robust in some of the schools that you're working with. So, when you are visiting different schools, when you're leading workshops, when you're supporting, right, some of this STEAM integration. What are you seeing in schools right now that tell you STEAM is evolving?
I think my favorite thing is what I call creating for social good.
Hmm.
So we've taken STEAM learning, and you know what? I was guilty of it. We did bridge building and we did paper
Hmm.
towers, right? We did all of those things, both with our students and with our teachers,
Yeah.
as a
Hmm.
way to just build teamwork and start getting folks to think a little bit differently about design work. But now I think like it has just opened up so much to where we now have kids who are designing real solutions for real world problems.
Hmm.
Like they are out there being the problem seekers, and then designing solutions for those problems that they're finding, whether they're in their school, in the broader community, or even globally. I'll share with you a teacher that I talk about in the latest edition of my book. Kristen Delator is a teacher down in Florida, and I connected with her on social media,
Hmm.
and we met and talked a few times. And I asked her if I could feature her in the book. And the work that she does is just magnificent. Very project based,
Hmm.
learning driven, in that her kids are designing driving questions and they're using the skills that they've learned through STEM and maker learning to kind of enact some
Yeah.
of the solutions. She is blessed to live near a coastline,
Hmm.
and she took her kids on a field trip to the beach. And so they walked the beach and they collected the things that they found there. And they brought back plastic bags and broken pieces of toys and,
Hmm.
right, all of this garbage. And they brought it back to the classroom space. And she said, this is a problem. It's not just a problem for us here in
Yeah.
Florida, but this is a problem across the globe.
Hmm.
And the kids were really taken aback, like, well, how are we going to solve a
Right.
problem like that's global? Right. So she started to push their thinking, and teams are brainstorming about what they might do at a more local level. And I think this is brilliant. Their school is on a large campus. And so they started walking around the campus and they noticed that their campus had a bunch of storm drains, and
Hmm.
every one they found was clogged with plastic bags and plastic bottles and stuff that people tossed aside. And the kids, these were like fourth and fifth and sixth graders, came back and said, we can solve that. We can do something about a problem that is right here on our campus.
Yeah.
So teams, first of all, cleaned up all the storm drains. But then this idea I just love because I think it is such a combination of acts, all the different aspects of STEAM learning. They created almost a mural, but on the ground, of PSAs, right? So instead of these concrete drains just being, gray or brown or, they have designed these images that say like, don't pollute our waters, don't throw your trash away here. And they've designed
Mm-hmm.
them in these bright, bold colors. So 14 different storm drains on their campus. This team of young people have now created as an opportunity to create some public awareness around a problem like this goes into our waterways and it impacts us and it impacts animals and plant life. And so I just love her example of getting her kids to design things and think not only about themselves, but beyond themselves and how the choices that we make really can impact so much more.
Well, just that idea that they have taken so much ownership of something, right? From the beginning, right? The ideation, right? All the way to the execution, right? Of working towards solving that problem, is huge when you think of all the layers, all the levels of thinking that requires, and all the different connections to things that, are happening across the academic, right, part of their day. And so I'm curious, when, you talk with educators, there's probably some who might misunderstand STEAM, right? Or have heard it at one time and then, aren't quite sure, where the acronym fits and other things that they're doing. Where do you think educators sometimes misunderstand STEAM, especially as technology, as AI become more common in their classrooms and their everyday work?
Well, I share this story often. I very early on in my career, I did a talk up in Toronto, and it was very science, technology, math based. But their school was starting a STEAM initiative, and so that was sort of the topic. And afterwards, these two teachers came up to me and said, that was really great, and thank you for sharing with us. But we teach language arts, so that's
Yeah,
kind of not our thing. And for me, again, I was a reading
right.
specialist. So that
Yeah.
was like a dagger to my reading
Hmm.
heart, thinking like, oh no, I don't want this message to disenfranchise teachers of English,
Right.
right? So I think what I think what is important is that teachers, no matter what subject they're on paper supposed to
Yeah.
teach. I think they need to find how this makes sense to them. I met with a group of librarians not too long ago who were kind of dabbling in some makerspace things in their library media spaces. But they were also feeling maybe on the fringe of some of this learning. And so we talked about things like, how can book choice lift up topics of, creating for social good or books that are highlighting, fabulous inventors or designers or artists and how they could find their role in that work there. And I think you're a fan of Adobe Express.
Yeah.
Um, Right. So they were using some tools like Adobe Express to use AI, generative
Mhm.
AI, in creative ways where kids were doing things like, public service announcements or creating infographics or using imagery to communicate things about STEM and STEAM learning. And so I think there are probably educators who haven't found their way in yet to this learning.
Mhm.
But I think my message is it doesn't matter what the acronym says. It's just meaningful, connected opportunities. And whether you connect, the engineering and the math, or maybe you connect
Mhm.
with the artistic and humanities side of STEAM, I think there's a place for every kind of
Mhm.
educator to find value in this work and then deliver that opportunity to their students.
A quick note from the presenter of today's episode, Jotform. Jotform lets you build a form in minutes. Student survey forms, homework submission forms, online quizzes, and so much more. You can start from scratch, or if you want to get a head start, check out their collection of free form templates designed with teachers, schools, and districts in mind. Learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. Yeah, and as you're describing that, those connections, right? Identifying those pieces, it really feels like something that makes the entry point so much more doable for an educator who might feel like they have to do all the things or they have to, address all the letters, right, or something, right? Like if they start by making those connections, right, that's a wonderful way for them to enter, into this work. And, I know that you also do work with robotics, right, as part of this. And you mentioned the literacy connection to just, STEAM experiences more generally. Can you tell us a little bit about, how robotics can support literacy and math goals? Sometimes that just gets looped in with thinking about coding, for example. But what are some of those literacy and even math connections?
Well, I think we're in a great place because there are so many cool robotics tools that kids can try. And I led the robotics summit at FETC this past
Yeah.
year, and so it was such a cool opportunity for me to kind of be in the mix of all these amazing educators and vendors who are
Hmm.
sharing some of the ways that they're pulling all of the subject areas in. I will tell you, I'll give a little shout out if it's okay,
Yeah.
to Kai's Education.
Hmm.
I love Kai's Education. They have some really cool kind of tabletop robotics. Some of the things are no devices needed, but they have
Hmm.
one that's called Literacy Kitchen. And it is just amazing for young learners who are also learning things like reading comprehension and vocabulary.
Yeah.
And they've crafted these almost games where the kids, as they're learning the coding, they're also learning literacy, which I just love. I also really like some things like, think about Ozobots and how
Yeah.
kids
Hmm.
can use the tools of, the robots and either the stickers or the markers, right? But I was in a classroom maybe 2 weeks ago where they had a big piece of craft paper on the table and kids are kind of drawing out the pattern of their robot, but it was an overlay to a story that they had to retell as a part of their language arts class. And so teachers are finding ways to integrate robotics in ways that just aren't a standalone, like, okay, I'm going to go to the robotics station and
Hmm.
learn how to do that. Great folks like Sphero who are building in science and
Hmm.
social studies content into, some of the programs that they're doing. I think as we expose teachers, they get to see, there's sort of in the summit, there were like these aha moments of, oh, like I can totally use that in my social studies class. Yes, right.
Yes. Right.
Everybody now is finding their way and finding the robotics tool that's right for them.
Hmm.
Um, and I think making some meaningful connections to their existing content or their state standards, right? Whatever is driving their instructional planning process, and using some of those tools that just present a new opportunity, I think, for kids to engage in something hands-on, and maybe find something that they're super passionate about.
Yeah, and just those examples right there, I think for someone who's trying to wrap their head around connections to their curriculum or to things that their students have shown interest in, right, give them a great starting place or things that they can kind of go into and investigate a little bit more deeper. And you mentioned about your role as a principal, and for someone who maybe is a school leader, a district leader listening into this conversation today, how can they design schedules that make room for interdisciplinary STEAM work? How can they support their teachers to make these things happen in their classrooms?
Well, I feel like that's kind of individualized, right?
Yeah.
I've worked with a couple schools over the last few years who have worked towards their STEM magnet designation,
Okay. Yeah.
which is
Mhm.
a whole process. And so I don't know that there's one right answer because you have
Mhm.
to find something that works for you. But um, I worked as a principal for 10 years. I was an assistant superintendent for 6 years and worked to build some of these programs in the schools that I was leading and supporting. And I think you have to incorporate a lot of teacher voice in that process. When I'm working with schools now as a consultant, like we're doing a lot of brainstorming to figure out like what makes sense and where are the opportunities that exist. But as a leader, um, I would say do whatever you can to create the time and space
Yeah.
for teachers to explore what might work. And I don't think there's one right answer.
Mhm.
I mean, I think there are folks who are creating like these, like what I need periods of time. There's a local high school right near where I live in Pittsburgh who, around the lunch hour, they have this time where kids are allowed to go to the thing that they feel passionate about, right? So like if
Mhm.
it's robotics or if it's knitting or if it's
Yeah.
something yoga, something physical, like they're getting to explore things. And that's because the leadership team has carved out those opportunities
Mhm.
and also allowed teachers to say, well, hey, I don't know anything about knitting, but I do woodworking in my free time.
Yeah.
And could I offer that as a way to kind of engage kids during this time? I think being open to the possibilities is probably the most important thing. And we don't have all the time in the
Right.
world.
Mhm.
That's something that is very tied tightly, especially when it comes to demands for, core curriculum and state
Mhm.
standards and state assessments. Um, but I think when you see the joy in students when they get to do something that they're deeply interested in, whether that's in a STEAM makerspace or something that's in their library, whether it's something that's outside. Like we've seen great examples of how STEM is now going outside into community gardens and things that are promoting environmental literacy. All of those options are things that I think allow kids to kind of find their place. And I think any way a leader can do that, you will see very quickly in the smiles on your students' faces what a difference it makes.
Yeah, and that flexibility, right? Just to kind of identify, what you already have, right? The capability to do and really listening in, right, to all those different stakeholders, like you mentioned, what their interests are, what they're excited about, and where something might fit, within an understandably really busy school week, let alone an individual, school day. And, you mentioned a few different tools, a few different things that you're seeing out in the field. And as we move through 2026, are there other emerging tools or trends that educators should really keep on their radar as they move through this year?
Well, I think obviously we'd be remiss if we didn't mention AI. I think there are a lot of
Mhm.
teachers who are exploring what that means for them or how that will work in their particular space. And the one thing that I've personally connected with, and it's what I've been leading with in a lot of the talks that I've been doing lately, is around putting those tools in the hands of students so that they can be creative.
Mhm.
Right. And I get that there's limitations and people are concerned
Absolutely.
about,
Right.
plagiarism and things like that. But right when you give kids tools like I mentioned, whether it's, Adobe Express or Canva to just explore their generative AI tools, whether you use something like, oh, have you tried animated drawings? It's a meta tool. It's
I
the
don't know.
coolest
I
thing.
haven't jumped into
Um,
that. Mm-mm.
Right. So I wish I had one here. I mean, you literally would just take like a white sheet of copy
Oh,
paper and
mhm.
do a drawing.
Yep.
It has to be humanoid, like it has to have a head and arms and legs. You can take a picture of it and upload it, and it creates an animation in like 60 seconds. I used it with a bunch of third graders last week, and they created these characters that they then wrote stories about, right? Because it was an AI it came from their drawing though. And they
Mhm.
used the AI tool to then, create a dancing, walking,
Right.
cat or dog or right. Um, and the kids seeing that come to life was
Mhm.
really, really cool for them. And then, from the literacy perspective,
Mhm.
they were not hesitant to dig into writing because it was something that they created.
Yeah.
They were
Mhm.
excited to write about the story of their character. So I would just encourage teachers to kind of think about what are the AI tools that maybe work for you to your benefit, but put them in the hands of kids on that creative aspect.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's just so many possibilities there. I also think sort of a trend that we need to pay a little bit more attention to is around career focuses.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's a lot happening right now in STEM careers, and we've all heard the stats about like, we don't even know what the jobs are going to be in the future. But one that I feel like is really hitting home for kids is around entrepreneurship
Yeah.
and how STEM can really be a springboard into that, right? Thinking about, whether they're creating an invention or starting a business, again, going back to that problem finding,
Mm-hmm.
what are the problems that exist? And can you design a product or a service that responds to that? And then what does that mean for like, how do I create a profit and how do I market
Yeah.
that business? I think there are so many exciting opportunities there. I want to mention, I don't know if you're familiar with this organization. It's called Yippee Exchange.
No, I don't know that.
YIPPEE, Yippee Exchange. And the great thing about this organization is they are privately funded. So educators can create an account and they earn points for free to buy products. So, like, if I'm a fourth grade teacher and I log in and create an account, I automatically get some points for creating an account. And if I review someone's product, I get some more points in
Mhm.
my account. And then I can turn around and use those points to buy lessons, resources, experiences, field trips, guest speakers for my students all around entrepreneurship. And it is just, it's a cool, cool
Yeah.
platform. I've been working with them for a little while now. And I just love finding ways that, again, like innovation and ideation
Mhm.
can kind of lead to career paths for
Yeah.
kids who maybe never even thought about that as an option.
Right, or just didn't think that that would be something that they could do, right? But I love that entrepreneurship connection to STEAM, and I think for someone who, right, has very valid concerns about what work and careers will look like in the future, that's a really great way to help students build skills that are transferable, right, to so many different situations. So this has been such a wonderful conversation full of strategies and resources and tips for people to dive into after today. Where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work and your books? Let us know.
They can find me on social media platforms on pretty much all of them. I am at Dr. Jacie Maslyk. They can also check out my website, which is steam-makers.com,
Yeah.
named after the new
Hmm.
edition of the book. You can find all of my books on Amazon as well. And folks can also email me if they're interested in talking more or want coaching or PD. They can reach me at jcmaslyk@gmail.com.
Well, this has been so wonderful, JC. Thank you so much for your time, your resources, and all of this actionable information for listeners today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It was so much fun chatting with Dr. Jacie Maslyk today. If you are interested in STEAM education, she is a go to resource, a must follow. You'll want to make sure to get in touch with her and learn more about what she's working on, including some of her books and publications. But let's finish up this episode, like we always do, with a few key points, some takeaways from the conversation. First, STEAM education has shifted from focusing on tools and stuff to deeper design thinking and collaboration skills. Every educator can find an entry point into STEAM, regardless of subject area or the letters in the acronym. Entrepreneurship is a growing trend in STEAM that helps students build transferable skills for future careers. Connecting STEAM to social good helps students think beyond themselves and understand how their choices impact communities. Remember to check out the description where you're listening to this episode to make sure you follow along. Don't forget to check out Dr. Jacie Maslyk's work all around STEAM and education. Thanks for tuning in to today's conversation. A big thank you to Jotform, the presenter of today's episode. To learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise, head to jotform.com/enterprise/education.